To get started.
Is it 8:30 yet? Yeah. On the dot right now, okay. All right, good morning. So our Executive Director of Sponsored Programs, Ahmed Hakim Elahi, will not be able to join us today, so I'll stand in and kind of MC the forum. So today on the forum, we're going to hear from our contracts office, 4 of our contracts office, and we're also going to hear from the proposals team. And if you have any questions for research, compliance, and integrity, or the awards team, or contracts and grants accounting, there are also people here to answer those questions. Okay, but let's start in with our first presentation. Okay, we're waiting for our PowerPoint here. All right, there it goes. Okay, so wait, do I have the clicker? Sorry. Okay, so good morning. I'm Grace Liu, Associate Director of Sponsored Programs. And today you will hear presentations from 4 UC Davis offices that handle contracts. That's Sponsored Programs, Innovation Access, Business and Revenue Contracts, and UC Davis Health Clinical Trials Contracts Office. I know that many of you in the department see a variety of contracts, and it can be difficult knowing where to send your documents to. So this presentation will give you some guidelines, so that will help you sort out who to email. So I just want to make clear that these 4 offices on the screen process research and service related contracts. These 4 offices don't handle all contracts that are on campus. So if you have, say, a construction related contract, we're not talking about that this morning. We're talking about contracts related to your research and service projects. And so here are the offices that'll present, and each office will talk about their roles and the types of documents that they review and sign. All right, first up, Sponsored Programs. Okay, that's my office. Sponsored Programs is responsible for submitting proposals and accepting awards on behalf of the Regents for projects funded by federal and state agencies, foundations, and other public and private sources. We're going to stop there and focus on 2 words. That's projects and funded. So the types of projects that Sponsored Programs cares about are research and service projects. Now that's service projects without a recharge rate. And that is funded, okay? So if there's money coming into the university to pay for this project, it might need to come to Sponsored Programs. And besides funded research or funded service contracts, Sponsored Programs is also responsible for drafting, negotiating, and executing awards and subawards for collaborative research. So any documents that would help make research happen might also need to come to Sponsored Programs. Now I just want to make clear one thing. Sponsored Programs generally does not handle graduate fellowships. Now there are the occasional cases where a graduate fellowship might be part of a larger project, but in general, graduate fellowships goes to our graduate studies office. Okay, so if you have graduate students, contact graduate studies for that. Here are some of Sponsored Programs' roles: reviewing proposals, reviewing and signing awards for research, training, and public service, issuing outgoing subawards, reviewing and signing awards for service projects, once again without a recharge rate, and reviewing confidentiality agreements in anticipation of research funding, so in anticipation of a sponsored project, and reviewing teaming agreements in anticipation of proposal submission. Okay, so those are some of our roles. His Sponsored Programs has 2 teams that reviews and signs contracts. Now, it's not necessary for you to know the division of labor within SPO, but in these next two slides, we're going to kind of drill down into some of the more specific contracts that we do handle. So kind of pay more attention to the types of contracts, and we'll divide it up into the correct teams. So the awards team handles collaborative research and service without a recharge rate agreements between educational institutions, regardless of whether funding is provided. Okay, so collaborative research agreements. We also look at cooperative research and development agreements. Those are CRADAs issued by federal agencies. We look at state of California agreements, awards issued by foundations, federal grants and contracts, and any award issued using FDP-like templates. FDP stands for Federal Demonstration Partnership, and it's on a template form. You will be able to tell that it's an FDP because it identifies it as such at the top of your contract. And also any award issued under a UCOP negotiated master agreement. So you'll be able to see on the front page, pretty near the top, that it was a UCOP negotiated agreement. And such sample agreements include a PG&E master and then a Lawrence Livermore one. So we would look at, okay. Okay, so the question is, what if PIs are collaborating on preliminary research in anticipation of they might submit a proposal later. Okay, if there is collaborative research going on and you're looking at dividing up intellectual property or dividing up potential roles, I would put together some collaborative research agreements. Okay, this is a non-funded agreement, but the idea is that you will work towards submitting a proposal in the future. So it would be a good idea to put together some collaborative research agreement at the preliminary stage. You know, a teaming agreement, that's what a teaming agreement is. It defines the roles, and it also looks at some potential rights. Who is bringing what to the project and what rights, especially intellectual property rights, are flowing out of that work. Okay, these are the kinds of contracts looked at by the negotiation team. Once again, focus on the types of contracts more than the team itself. All UC Davis negotiated master agreements, all awards from for-profit corporations that do not fall under a UCOP negotiated master agreement. And these would include contracts from for-profit entities. And by for-profit entities, I usually mean corporations, companies, with federal flow-through. Okay, so even though the money might come from the federal government, if it passes through a company and then comes to us, okay, that's something we would look at. All confidentiality agreements, non-disclosure agreements, teaming agreements, intellectual property agreements, and MOUs. So that's what the previous question was referring to. These are all the research-related agreements that go into people working together, right? I mean, at the beginning, all your PIs are all friendly and get along, but we've definitely been in the middle of some cases where people have stopped getting along, and it's very useful to look at agreements and to see what each party is bringing to the project and what each party is expecting to get out of it. Okay, it helps us solve some problems later on in the road if there's a falling out between investigators. So I include 2 email addresses at the bottom. You can just remember the awards@ucdavis.edu address. If you send your document to awards@UC Davis, we can send it to the right team. Are there any questions for sponsored programs? Okay. At this point, I will hand it off to our clinical trials folks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Valerie. This is my partner in crime, Mark Vassar, and we're from the Clinical Trials Contracts Office over on the Sacramento campus. So first of all, our team is the Clinical Trials Contracts Office, but we're a part of the broader Health Contracts Office. So the Health Contracts Office also houses health affairs and health plan. So some of you may work with health affairs, which we refer to as the business contracts of the health side, and they do all non-research related contracts. So there's a little list of some of the contracts they handle. And health plan contracts, most of you will probably never work with them, but there's also a list of what they work on. Oh, thank you. Thanks. You're amazing. Okay, so the CTCO, we're responsible for negotiating industry-funded clinical trials. If there's any nonprofit or federal funds involved, we do not handle it. Please do not send it to us. We don't want it. We also work on subcontracts if it's 100% industry funded. So subcontracts coming into us. We also work on subawards going out. If you have a clinical trial that we worked on and you need to sub out to other sites, we can help you with that. We also do clinical trial related agreements such as protocol specific CDAs and clinical service agreements. Lori Diltz handles all CDAs. She'll work on amendments for clinical trials. Julie Callahan is our budget analyst. She'll help you with any budget or payment term issues you have. And we also work on startup agreements. So if we are working on a clinical trial agreement for you and the negotiations fall through, or the study is full and they don't have space for another site, but you've already started performing some of your startup activities, we can put a little agreement in place for you so you can claim some of the money for your startup activities.
My turn. We wanted to kind of give a really specific definition of what is considered a clinical trial here at the University of California. I've got it at school. It is the controlled clinical testing in human subjects of investigational new drugs, devices, treatments, or diagnostics, or comparisons of approved drugs, devices, treatments, or diagnostics to assess safety, efficacy, benefit, cost, adverse reactions, outcomes, etc. Studies can be conducted under a sponsor-initiated protocol where it is authored by a for-profit industry pharma company. It can also be conducted under an investigator-developed protocol where that is either our PI here or maybe a PI at another institution. One of the things that I learned working at sponsored programs and working over in health contracts is follow the money. So if you can follow your money back to a pharma company or a for-profit company, that means that it will end up for a clinical trial or a clinical service agreement. That agreement will end up in our office. Clinical trials are subject to 26% indirect cost rate based on total direct cost or TDC. There are no exemptions. The only exemption would be for IRB fees. And then all of our service agreements are subject to 39% total direct cost. A couple of pointers. So a lot of times in SPO, sometimes we have things called like stamp and goes where the processing of the agreement is really fast. The processing for clinical trial agreements is not fast. The average is about a little over 3 months. And we're seeing that 49% of that time is with the department, whether they're continuing to negotiate a budget, whether they're still working out details of the project, or whether we have asked them to confirm whether they can accept some specific provision or term of the agreement, or when we're getting PI concurrence. 45% of the time, the agreement is sitting with the sponsor for their review, and we try to turn things around as quickly as we possibly can. So we've gotten our time down to 6% of that total time is with our office for review, processing, confirming compliance items like COI, things like that. The reason why it can sometimes take a very long time, and 91 days is actually pretty good. We have some other campuses who've been working on agreements for like close to a year. But the most negotiated terms are the definition of study data and making sure that that study data is limited to the deliverables that we're giving to the sponsor. The confidentiality section, ensuring that not everything is considered confidential, but just very specific items. Obviously, inventions and intellectual property, we understand that the chance of any sort of IEP coming out of a clinical trial authored by a for-profit company is probably very slim, but we still need to make sure that we are working within the confines of our principles for future research results. Indemnity is something that we can negotiate quite often, and then subject injury, which is we require for any sponsor authored protocol. If we're going to give up our rights to inventions, we require both indemnification and subject injury from a sponsor. So sometimes getting through this list of these major roadblocks sometimes to our contracting can take a while. And so that's why that number is up there above 90 days. But we're trying to work as hard as we can to get that down below 90, at least a little bit. Are there any questions? I know you guys, most of you probably don't really work with our office too often, but just in case you sometimes do. Yeah. How do they submit a protocol? So we have jumped on the Cayuse bandwagon last year. So all of our agreements or request to negotiate agreement go through Cayuse. We have specific requirements for those submissions that are a little bit different than what the instructions actually on Cayuse say. We have a handbook available if you need that. It's on our website. You can also email either Valerie or myself for that handbook that gives very specific step-by-step instructions on how to submit your protocol and your agreement for a clinical trial contract to our office to negotiate. Yes, please make sure that you label it as UC Davis Health. Anything else? And we understand there's gray areas too. I mean, we work, closely with Alyssa a lot of times and with Paula to make sure that, wherever, if the agreement that comes through, maybe it's, it's not quite clear exactly where it should go. We work with them pretty closely to make sure that we're giving it to the right office to negotiate. Awesome. Oh, business and revenue service contracts.
Morning, everyone. I'm Victoria Chege. I am the lead within the Business and Revenue Contracts Office. Business and Revenue Contracts is part of supply chain, is part of procurement and contracts services, which is within supply chain management. We thought we'd put that up there to give you a framework for how we fit into the overall structure. In terms of our role, we negotiate, review, negotiate, and establish agreements on behalf of the university for services and service-related transactions. Agreements are submitted to us through Kuali or KFS, but that is basically our role. This is a snapshot of all of the agreements, a good representation of the agreements that we process. It's not exhaustive, but it's a good representation. A majority of the agreements that we process are revenue agreements for which there are approved rates. That's the difference between the service agreements that sponsor programs processes. And then we will process confidentiality agreements that are leading up to revenue or another type of agreement that we would process. We process facility use agreement, for example, if a PI needs access to an external entity's property to do some sampling or something like that for a period of over 30 days and less than a year, we would process those types of agreements as well. So it's a long list of agreements that we process. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but this is basically a good representation of that. And then we have a variety of resources that are available to you. You could obviously reach out to us directly, but on our website, We have a good list of information that could be helpful. That's it for us.
Thank you. How do I move this forward? That one. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Diana Francis from the MTA team at Innovation Access. Innovation Access is an office, a unit, a part of the Office of Research. Our office is right down the hallway. We're broken up into two teams. The one side that handles the researchers who have actual inventions and patents and related to that stuff. And then there's a group of us that handle material transfer agreements. Two of my colleagues are here, Vio in the back and Marianne, she does copyright. So if you have any questions or anything, you could ask us after. And so Innovation Access is committed to protecting and commercializing the intellectual property, also known as IP, and also tangible research property, which is pretty much what the MTA team works on. And what you would see come across are material transfer agreements, data transfer agreements, and then confidentiality agreements that would relate to receiving material or data at a future date. So what is IP, intellectual property? There's a definition of it there for you with a couple of examples. So these are actually items that our researchers have invented during the course of their research here on campus. And then tangible research property is also stuff that's been created during the research process, but which is not patented or protected by patent rights. And so our researchers are sharing material that they created with the globe. And then we are also getting material that other researchers created from around the globe. And so there's a few examples there. We have, it never ceases to amaze me, the types of things that our researchers want to share. So this, if they think of it, they'll want to share it with somebody. So it's a pretty interesting process. So the MTA team we have a senior IP officer, Jan Carmichael. She is the authorized official. So if you ever see an MTA come through or a data agreement and it says it needs a signature of an authorized official, then that means it's someone with the delegated authority to sign that agreement. And we don't want our researchers signing these types of agreements because then they could be held personally liable for that. And so the university would protect them in their course of research. And then we have one IP officer joining us, and then we have Marianne as our copyright, and then 4 MTA analysts that work on a regular MTAs. So we make sure that the agreements comply with a bunch of policies and guidelines. Health systems contracts referenced our principles regarding future research results. And so those are the guidelines that we follow when we review the contracts to make sure that they comply with UC policies, federal laws, state laws. So there's a lot of work involved in reviewing those contracts. We don't just add a signature to them. And we negotiate approximately 800 to 1,000 agreements a year. So we do a lot of work. And so sometimes it may take longer for things to get done if we're negotiating with a foreign entity or just with someone that or a for-profit company, then it might take a little bit longer. And then we also do the data sharing agreements and confidentiality agreements. And then here's a definition of what a material transfer agreement is. It's a contract between the university and another party or for-profit or the government to transfer proprietary research material as well as any data that might be associated with that material or information associated with that material. And some of the typical terms that we'll see would be what the material can be used for, what would happen with any substances created during that research. Publication, we want to make sure our researchers are free to publish their research results, and sometimes material providers might not want that information disclosed if it might put them in a bad light or something. So we have to make sure the researchers can publish. We are making sure that any inventions that come out of that research are protected and still owned by the university. Confidentiality obligations and other standard terms. Clinical trials mentioned indemnification, that's a big one that we work with a lot with other outside parties, and then a bunch of other terms. And then this is kind of a process of a list of things that will happen. If you get an MTA or a data agreement or a CDA, then you can go to, okay, well, my link is missing. But I did leave some forms in the back, material transfer, data transfer request form. You can, and our website address is on that form, so take one with you. You can go there and download the form and fill it out, have your researcher fill it out, submit it to our office along with any agreement that you've received from the other party. If you don't have an agreement with them, you can let us know and we'll try and get one from them, or we may be able to create one of our own. If your researcher is sharing material with an outside party, then you don't have a form, of course. You would submit it to our office, and we have forms that we use or agreements that we use for that. Once you prepare the forms, then you can email it to the address on the form, mta@ucdavis.edu, and it will be assigned to an appropriate analyst. We're divided up by schools and units on campus and at the Med Center. And so you will receive an email saying who's it's assigned to. And then if it's an urgent matter and your researcher really is anxious to get the material, you should email the analyst directly and say, or call and say the researcher really wants this right away. Because we have so many agreements that we're working on at one time, they're just put in a queue of the order received is the order that we respond to. So we're working on the agreements that came in before your request. And so if it's urgent, we should be alerted to it so that we could bump it in our queue and start working on it right away. And then if we have any questions or anything, we're going to email the researchers, and we talk to them a lot so that we understand completely what the transaction entails. That way we make sure the contract is protecting everything that is going to transpire in that. And then we'll send out a final version after we're all done negotiating with the other party and have signatures executed. Sometimes we might email you and say, please get this signed by the researcher. And so if you could help facilitate that, that would be awesome. And MTAs are a really tricky thing. So sometimes it could be as easy as a click and it's approved because we've seen it 100 times, or it might take a very long time to negotiate with the other party. So, but we're happy to communicate any of the delays with you. And we always want to get things done as quickly as possible. That's all I have to say. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is Grace again. So here are the contact information of the presenters today. And also you can just Google all of our offices. We have a plethora of information on all of our websites. Or if you have specific questions about each of these offices, you can email us. All right, so the next item on our agenda is that we will hear from the Sponsor Programs Proposals team. That's Krista Hicksonbaugh and Alyssa Bunn.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here and online. While Cassie gets our slides set up, we just wanted to go over a couple housekeeping items with you really quickly. So we are running through, as most of you know, we've been online with Cayuse SP for about 18 months now, a little over 18 months. And we're doing reporting of data to make sure the data integrity that's in the system is accurate. And we're finding that there's some things that maybe some people don't know about, and we want to make sure that you know everything that we know. So one of the things that we found was that when creating your IPF, your internal processing form, you'll see, do you have a clicker? It's not the light. You put the light on the sponsor. The light will work, right? Do we have any cats in the room? You know, the tag. Anyway, thanks, Kathy. We need Odie here. Okay, so one of the things that we wanted to point out is the sponsor. There's a separation between sponsor, and that is your sponsor who's going to fund UC Davis. Then there's the prime funding agency. That is your flow-through sponsor. That is, say, for example, you have, you're working with the University of Arizona, and Arizona is submitting the full proposal with NIH. So we want to make sure that that separation is identified correctly so that we're counting it correctly and showing who our partners are with UC Davis. So one of the things we want to make sure is it's okay to leave this field blank if you do not have a flow-through sponsor. It's okay. So, oh, thank you. So some people feel they want to fill in the boxes and do their due diligence, and it's okay for that box to stay blank. As you can see, here is an instance where some people have tried to enter the same sponsor twice, again, trying to fill in the box, doing their due diligence. However, this creates a misleading effect that we are actually partnering with NIH under a subaward agreement when it's a direct sponsor funding to UC Davis. And it throws off our reporting of who UC Davis is partnering with under subaward agreements. So we wanted to let you know that you do not have to enter anything here when it's a direct funding sponsor. If you accidentally start to put something in there, you can click no sponsor in the field and it will pop up none in that field area because it will not go back to blank once you started to enter something into that field. And if you have any questions, yes. Okay. Okay, so the question was, if we have multiple funding sponsors that are going into one pot of money that's then going to fund UC Davis, is there a way to identify all those multiples? We have in the system called submission notes. We highly recommend that you use that field to identify all the different funding agencies that are funding that one state entity and then sending it to UC Davis. Once the agreement comes in, it'll help us look to see to make sure that we've identified the appropriate prime with that awarded project. Thank you. And then one of the other things is the allocation of credit. The allocation of credit, as you'll see really smallly up here, thank you, Elisa, is one that is important for the campus community in identifying the allocation for the different facilities and our departments that are involved with that research effort. Who gets credit for the proposal? Who gets credit? Intellectual credit for the proposal based on the department, based on the effort that's identified in there. That effort must equal 100%. It is the thank you. See, I'm doing it again. Thank you. See, she keeps me honest. So that allocation helps identify who gets credit for the projects. And with that, it must equal 100%. It is up to the PI. It is not tied to the indirect cost return at all, or calculation of the indirect cost return for the departments. It, again, it's the intellectual credit for the research effort. And it is required, although it doesn't have a red button to identify it's required, it is a required field, and it's one that our office will ask you to complete if it has not been done. And so we want to make sure that you know that this is a decision that the PI should be making to identify if there's multiple people on the project, they can separate it as divided out evenly, or they can appropriate it as necessary, breaking it down however they think that effort should, not effort, that allocation should be identified for the project. So we want to make sure that you see that, because it doesn't identify that it is a required field, but it is based on our reporting efforts that we need to do for the campus. So you'll see the proposal analyst coming back and asking the question of what is the allocation? And the ramifications are that sometimes if this has already been processed and already been signed, the IPF has already been authorized by the chairs in the Associated Dean's offices. If that comes back and that change needs to happen, there's a possibility that the signatures, the authorizations that were provided by those department chairs and or deans could drop off the IPF, and you would be required to re-sign. They would be required to re-sign or authorize the proposal for that project. And we're adding a note to the system to make sure that you all people creating the IPF know that. Right now it's in testing. It's the same with effort as well. That is over here under these sections. So it's important to try to be as accurate as you possibly can when you're preparing your IPF and submitting it to sponsored programs, so that we can ensure that there won't be any authorizations dropped if things need to be adjusted. But we will contact you as soon as we find out if there's anything that doesn't balance out between the proposal, the budget, and or the IPF as part of our review process. Does anybody have any questions? All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Chris. No, so this is Grace Liu. I don't have any specific announcements for the awards team, but if you have any questions about your awards or your contracts, feel free to email me. And now I will turn it over to James Ringo, Contracts and Grants Accounting. Any updates? All right, he has a list. All right.
I've got a long list of one item. Good morning. I just wanted to, wow, it's really loud today. Oh, okay. I just wanted to discuss a change that we made to our key personnel monitoring process in the last month or so. Based on some feedback we got from our initial implementation of the monitoring, we have streamlined the process, hopefully simplified it a lot. If you receive an email from us, it's really just a notification that we are seeing a place where there is some level of direct charge effort that's been captured in the effort commitment system, but we are not seeing any payroll hitting for that project. And it's really up to you to go and just take a look. Is there, is the effort that's in the effort commitment system out of whack and needs to be adjusted? Is there really a missing payroll distribution that needs to be updated? Those types of things. You do not need to reply back to us. It's really a one-way. It's just a little heads up. It's just a little friendly tap on the shoulder that you might want to take a look at this. If you do have questions about, why is this showing up, then please, yes, do reply back. It's coming out from our compliance analyst, Tamar Khalid. So please reply back to him and let him know, and he can help you figure out where the mismatch is. Is that okay? Did I see a hand or was looking? Okay. All right. That's it. Okay.
Okay, no questions for CGA. Are there any questions for research, compliance, and integrity? Jessica Trask is here to answer any questions about research, compliance, and integrity. Or do you? Export control, stem cell, conflict of interest. We have a question. Jessica, you thought you would be out of it.
No, we got one for Jessica. All right. So Jessica, with the recent research misconduct findings at Duke University, what impact, if any, does it have on UC Davis?
That is a good question. Just to recap, oh yeah, I can go, oh, that's right, there's a camera. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Trask. I'm an analyst in research compliance and integrity here at the Office of Research. And the question was with regard to the Duke settlement for research misconduct. just to recap, anybody who didn't see that hit the news this week, because we don't all have a Google aggregator for research misconduct findings. There was a multi-million-dollar settlement between Duke University and the federal government, part of which was allocated, I think it was like $33 million, went to a particular whistleblower at Duke, who was at Duke at the time, who alerted the university of falsification of research results that were being used to apply for federal grants. And so there was an internal investigation at Duke. Of course, part of that settlement was that Duke University did not have any, I don't think they accepted, there was no finding of fault to Duke, but there was a large financial settlement. And the question was, how does that affect UC Davis? Besides the fact that, knock on wood, we're not paying multi-million-dollar settlements. Our office is charged with investigating all research misconduct allegations. Those come into us all the time. They also come in through the anonymous whistleblower hotline. If you see something that you think just doesn't seem right, it seems unethical, and that's actually how most of these things come in. Nobody sees something in their lab and goes, this is research misconduct. It's always like, this just doesn't sit right. I'd like to talk to somebody about it. So they either call our office, they talk to me, they talk to one of the other analysts, they call the anonymous whistleblower hotline. There's also an online portal, so you can submit your information anonymously. And just a note that if you call us and you say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, we have a responsibility to count that as an allegation. So what we sometimes recommend that people do is, if you're not exactly sure, you just kind of want to bounce this off of people, we deal in hypotheticals all the time. So never hesitate to call us and go, hypothetically, if somebody was going back through our lab notebooks at night and, whiting out numbers and writing in new numbers, would that constitute research misconduct? Yes, it would. But because it's a hypothetical, we can have a conversation and we can talk about sort of what that would constitute and what our steps going forward would be. And then you can make the personal decision as to whether or not you want to go forward with an actual allegation. Just a side note, because we're talking about research misconduct and we've got an audience of people who work in labs and research facilities, research misconduct is actually something very specific. The federal government defines it as falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism, and that language is echoed in our institutional research misconduct policy. So we get a lot of things that, while they may be academic misconduct, they may be unethical behavior, don't actually fit that very specific definition of what research misconduct is. So we ask people to bear that in mind when they're thinking about, is this misconduct? Is this unethical behavior? One other thing, UC Davis, like a lot of other institutions, doesn't have a specific authorship policy. We get a lot of questions about authorship and credit in publications. Unfortunately, because we don't have an authorship policy, those sorts of claims, although we will assist you in any way that we can, are not directly actionable by our office. So usually we refer any sort of authorship things back to the department. And that was using Duke as an excuse to let everybody know about how we handle research misconduct at UC Davis, but I hope that addresses it. Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you. All right, do we have any more questions from anyone in the room or online? Yeah.
Do we have specific analysts assigned to us for awards? Currently, I know there was a lot of turnover and...
Yes, there are assigned award analysts. For a while, the awards team had some vacancies. We are working to fill those. So if you let me know what your college or department is, I can tell you who your assigned award analyst is right now. If you have an award to be processed, forward that to awards@ucdavis.edu. If you have a specific question about an award, you can email your assigned analyst. Yes, you can go to the Cayuse Award. If you pull up that number, it will be CS Specialist. You'll see that on the proposal tab. CS stands for Contract Specialist.
Do we have any other questions for anyone or anything anyone want to share? All right, so I guess we're finished, Grace, unless you have anything to sum up.
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much for all the offices who participated this morning. It was great. And thank you all for joining us. Thanks. Bye.